The survival school I sent her to for strength taught her how to leave me for the man who built the traps. A lesson in betrayal written not in ink, but in the topography of deceit and the cold steel of a custom survival knife left carelessly in a gear drawer. The miscarriage that took our daughter at 20 weeks didn't just end a pregnancy, it detonated a silent bomb in the center of Nina's soul, leaving a crater I could feel in the very atmosphere of our home. The vibrant, fiercely independent woman I'd married, the one who dragged me on spontaneous weekend hikes to forgotten fire lookouts and laughed with her head thrown back at the sheer chaos of a sudden downpour, simply vanished. In her place was a hollow-eyed stranger, a ghost in sweatpants who moved through our rooms with a terrifying quietness, her gaze forever skipping away from the door of the nursery we'd already painted a soft, hopeful yellow, named Morning Sun. My attempts to bridge the chasm, clumsy words that sounded hollow even to me, a hand on her shoulder she'd shrug off as if scalded. Pamphlets for support groups felt like trying to Morse code across an ocean with a flickering, dying flashlight. Her grief was a private, fortified country under a perpetual state of siege, and I, the supposed ally, had been stripped of my rank and left milling outside the walls. My solution, like that of many desperate men who love to fix broken things, was to try and rebuild, to forcibly resurrect the warrior I knew lived inside her. I researched with a frantic, focused energy, scrolling past gentle yoga for grief retreats and gentle counseling circles until I found it. Ethel read Wilderness Resilience, a brutal 2-week intensive survival school buried deep in the rain-lashed cathedral of the North Cascades. Their marketing was stark, all black and forest green. Their motto a gauntlet thrown, "Find the core of your strength when all else is stripped away." The founder and lead instructor, Kael, was a minor celebrity in this niche world. His promo photos showed a man in his late 40s, with a gaze that seemed to look through the camera and into your own vulnerabilities. His hands scarred, capable, permanently etched with dirt resting on a hand-forged axe. It was punishingly expensive, a sum that represented a year of careful savings. Without a second thought, I sold my vintage Triumph Bonneville, a bike I'd painstakingly restored over 3 years, to fund it. I presented the opportunity to Nina not as a gentle suggestion, but as a challenge, a lifeline couched as a dare. "Remember who you are," I whispered one evening, holding the glossy brochure under the lamplight like a sacred text. "Not just my wife, not just what happened, but the woman who isn't afraid of anything, the one who belongs out there." She looked from the brochure to me, and for the first time in months, a faint, ghostly spark ignited in the flat gray of her eyes. Not warmth, not gratitude, but a flicker of the old predatory curiosity. She nodded, a single, sharp dip of her chin. It was the most decisive gesture she'd made since the hospital. I drove her to the remote rendezvous point, a gravel lot at the end of a Forest Service road that seemed to swallow sound. A handful of people milled about, clad in expensive, muted technical gear, their faces a mixture of anxiety and resolve. And then there was Kael. In person, he was both more and less than his photos. Less classically handsome, more intensely present. He didn't just occupy space, he commanded it, radiating a calm, untamed authority that felt both magnetic and faintly threatening. He shook my hand, his grip like seasoned oak, his eyes assessing me not as a husband entrusting his most precious possession, but as a potential resource or, more likely, an obstacle to be cataloged and later circumvented. "We'll take good care of her," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. "We'll help her find what she's lost." Then he turned to Nina, and his entire demeanor shifted. It didn't soften, it intensified. His focus narrowed onto her with a laser's precision, as if she were a fascinating, complex knot in a piece of cordage he was determined to untie. "Ready to work?" he asked her, the question sounding less like an inquiry and more like a call to arms. She straightened her shoulders, a gesture so achingly familiar it stole my breath, and nodded, her gaze locked on his. I felt a confusing cocktail of profound relief and a sharp, vinegary jealousy as I watched her walk away with him into the thick green wall of trees. Not a single backward glance, The 2 weeks she was gone were a strange, suspended purgatory. I haunted our too-quiet house, jumping at every notification. I refreshed the school's bare-bones blog obsessively, searching for grainy, uploaded photos from their satellite communicator. I found one. She was in the background of a shot focused on a primitive shelter, her face smudged with dirt and ash, her hair a wild single braid over her shoulder, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration as she worked on a bow drill for fire. She looked alive, not happy, but intensely focused, engaged. I clung to that pixelated image, telling myself I'd done the right thing, the brave thing. I was the selfless husband who had let her go to be remade. When I picked her up, the change was physical and metaphysical. She was leaner, harder, tanned a deep brown. A fresh scar, thin and white, marked her forearm. But it was the stillness that was most unnerving. The frantic, trapped animal energy of her grief had been replaced by a calm, distant focus, like a hunter downwind of her prey. She hugged me, but it was brief, efficient, the hug of a comrade in arms. On the drive home, she talked not about feelings, but about techniques. The 3 edible substitutes for pine needles, the psychological trick to overcoming the aversion to drinking from a murky source after purification, the way fear is just a chemical signal to be acknowledged and filed away. She spoke with a new vocabulary, one infused with Kael's stark philosophies. He says civilization is a collective delusion, a cage of soft dependencies. True strength, true freedom, comes from knowing you can walk away from every single system, from every person, and not just survive, but thrive on your own terms. I nodded, smiling with a stiff jaw, my heart performing a slow, sickening roll in my chest. She had found a new gospel in the wilderness, and the prophet was a man who lived by his own rules, in the trees. The first concrete clue was subtle, a shift in her preparations. The aimless hours staring at the wall were replaced by long, silent sessions at her laptop, the blue light reflecting in her intent eyes. She wasn't browsing grief forums or Pinterest boards for nurseries. She was deep in topographic map services, public land parcel databases from the Bureau of Land Management, and forums on off-grid living. Expensive, specialized gear began to arrive in plain brown boxes, a compact Garmin InReach satellite messenger, an ultralight Durston tent that cost more than our monthly mortgage, a tiny titanium stove. When I asked, feigning casual interest, she didn't elaborate. "I just want to be prepared," she said, her voice devoid of its old warmth. Kael says preparedness is the only real form of freedom. Everything else is just hope, and hope is a liability in the field. The name Kael was a constant, reverent punctuation in her speech, a touchstone for all her new, hardened convictions. Then I found the knife. It was a Saturday, and I was searching for a Phillips head screwdriver in the jumbled chaos of our garage workbench. My hand closed around a leather sheath, tooled in an intricate Norse-inspired pattern. I drew it out. It was a stunning piece of craftsmanship, a handmade puko-style blade, maybe 7 inches of mirror-polished high-carbon steel that whispered of terrifying sharpness. The handle was weathered birch, shaped to fit a specific hand. It was when I tilted it to the light that I saw them. 2 initials, N and K, etched with delicate, deliberate strokes near the hilt, intertwined like 2 serpents or the roots of a single twisted tree. The cold that shot through me was instant and total, freezing the blood in my veins. I found her in the backyard, repotting a fern with a grim efficiency. I held the knife out, the leather sheath dangling. "What is this?" Her face didn't flush with the guilt of a discovered secret. It hardened, her jaw setting, her eyes meeting mine with a flat, challenging glare. "It was a gift for graduating top of the class. It's a tool, Leo. A very good one." She wiped her hands on her jeans. "Don't be so fragile." The word fragile was a carefully aimed dart, dipped in the venom of Kael's rhetoric. I was the civilized man, the soft one, the one threatened by a simple, beautiful tool. I was the liability. I backed down, muttering something about it being nice, the knife a lead weight in my suddenly numb hand. The true soul-annihilating investigation began that same night. I was the one who managed our finances, who paid the bills. The subscription for the Garmin InReach was on my credit card. Using the account recovery option, the backup email was still an old shared address she'd forgotten to change. I reset the password. My hands trembled as I logged into the web portal. The device wasn't just for emergencies. It was their digital clandestine network. The message log, with its precise timestamps and unencrypted text, was a devastating real-time chronicle of my own dismantling. These weren't love letters. They were operational dispatches from a Cold War being waged against my life. Kael, grid square confirmed. The cabin is sound, roof intact. Solid spring 200 millimeters east. No record of ownership traceable online. Perfect for phase 2, a true clean slate. Nina. Assets are being consolidated quietly. Liquidity is higher than anticipated after the bike sale. He suspects nothing. Still sees it as part of my recovery. Timeline holding firm. Kael. Good. Remember, the extraction is the most critical phase. Any emotional compromise, any hesitation, and the entire environment becomes actively hostile. You've trained for this. This is your final field test. Your old life is the trap. I've shown you the release. Nina, I'm ready. This life, this house, him, it all feels like the cage now. See you at the rally point. I'm bringing the knife, the cabin, the assets, the extraction, the hostile environment. I was no longer her husband. I was a logistical problem, a resource to be liquidated, my own motorcycle sale funding my wife's escape, an environment to be evaded. Their shared language, born in the struggle of building fires and navigating by stars, had been meticulously weaponized against the shared life we'd built. The survival skills were, in fact, escape and evasion tactics, and I was the threat from which she needed to evade. I spent the night in a state of cold, lucid horror, scrolling through the topographic maps they'd shared as waypoints detailed turn-by-turn routes from our suburban home to a remote, uncharted property in the Sawtooth Wilderness, a place Kael had apparently been squatting on and improving for years, a kingdom for two. The emotional impact was a physical blow, a sucker punch to the soul that left me gasping for air in the dark office. But from that pain emerged a resolve as hard and cold as the granite of those distant mountains. They saw me as a passive, civilized obstacle, a feature of the cage to be left behind. I would show them that a system, when provoked, could fight back with bureaucratic precision and legal ruthlessness, and that the wild they so revered had its own set of pitiless, unforgiving laws. I didn't delete a single message. Instead, I decided to feed their conspiracy with poisoned data. I began to subtly alter the financial liquidity picture she was monitoring. I created fake PDFs of investment statements suggesting a large upcoming capital gains tax penalty that would tie up the assets for at least 9 months. I let her accidentally overhear a stressed, one-sided phone call I staged with a fake accountant, loudly worrying about an IRS audit flag on some old stock trades. I wanted to slow their frantic timeline, to inject the corrosive acid of doubt and financial uncertainty into their perfect plan. My real counteroffensive was far more damning and executed in the shadows. Kael's entire operation existed in the gray margins. His school used public wilderness for commercial gain without the proper permits, a serious federal offense. His homestead was a squatter's fantasy, a flagrant violation of a dozen land management statutes. Using a paid VPN and a painstakingly crafted pseudonym, I became Thomas Reed, a concerned environmentalist and avid hiker. I filed meticulously detailed anonymous reports with the National Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, complete with GPS coordinates of his structures, photos I'd scraped from his semi-public social media, and links to his commercial website offering courses on that very land. I contacted the parents of past Ethelred students, posing as a researcher for an article on the psychological risks of unregulated wilderness therapy. My gentle professional probing unlocked a vault of unease. I found a woman from a cohort 3 years prior, now a paralegal, who confessed Kael had groomed her sense of isolation after a divorce, leading to a brief, psychologically damaging affair she was too ashamed to report. Another set of parents spoke in hushed tones about his cult-like hold on participants, how he'd drive wedges between them and their families, framing the outside world as toxic. I documented every name, date, and quote, weaving a net of credible testimony. The final, psychological twist required me to become a student of their own grim craft. I used the Find My Device function on the satellite messenger account, a feature Nina had either forgotten or assumed I was too fragile to know about. I watched the pulsing dot of her device on my laptop screen during her practice hikes and solo reflection weekends. They were precise recons of their escape route. On a day she told me she was spending with a grieving friend from a support group, a lie so smooth it chilled me. I arrived at a specific point along their route first, a rocky overlook they'd marked in their logs as Checkpoint Delta. Following the clues in their messages, I found a specific unnatural cairn. My heart hammering against my ribs, I dismantled it. Inside a military-grade waterproof case was their go bag, a final set of instructions written in Kael's cramped hand, $5,000 in cash, burner phones, and 2 forged driver's licenses for a Nina Kael and a Kael Strom. They were already erasing me, literally. The new last name was a brand, a claim. I took forensic photos of everything with my phone, the metadata tagging the location. I left it all undisturbed, but I added one item of my own from my pack, a single heavy-duty bear trap, legal to own but brutal in its implication. I didn't set the savage spring. I simply placed it on top of the cache, its cold, serrated steel jaws gleaming dully in the mountain light. A message in a language they would understand. I know your traps. I am in your wilderness now. The climax was the extraction night, the 0 hour. According to their final encrypted messages, it was set for the day after a large, final transfer Nina was to make from our joint savings. The air in our house was taut enough to snap. She was a live wire of suppressed energy, packing a small, suspiciously light, overnight hiking bag with clinical efficiency. I pretended to be utterly absorbed in a complex work spreadsheet, the blue glow masking the storm in my eyes. Have a good hike, I said, my voice a studied monotone, not looking up from the screen. Weather looks clear. Be careful out there. She paused in the doorway, a silhouette of my undoing. Then she walked over and kissed the top of my head, a dry, perfunctory kiss that felt like a funeral rite, the anointing of a corpse. I will, she said, her voice strangely soft. Don't wait up. The moment her car tail lights disappeared around the corner, I became a machine. First, the financial gut punch. With a few clicks, I executed the transfer I'd preset not out of our account, but a simultaneous liquidation of our joint investment portfolio into an account held solely in my name, a legal move our prenup allowed in cases of suspected financial malfeasance. The fraud alerts we'd set up together years ago blazed to life. Next, the social detonation. I sent the compiled, watertight dossier, the satellite message logs, photos of the forged IDs in the cache, the anonymized testimonies about Kael, the filed land violation reports to Nina's parents, her pragmatic older sister, and our 3 closest mutual friends. The subject line was designed to bypass denial. Nina is in acute danger. This is not a hike. Evidence attached. Finally, the official response. I called the non-emergency line of the county sheriff's office where the Sawtooth cabin was located, and then the direct line for the district ranger station. My voice was calm, dripping with grave concern. I have reason to believe my wife, under the sustained manipulative influence of a man named Kael Strom, is attempting to disappear into the wilderness with him tonight. I believe she is a victim of coercive control. She may be a danger to herself. Here are the precise coordinates of their planned rendezvous and his illegal structure. Then I drove. Not to follow her, but to a high wooded vantage point I'd scouted weeks earlier, overlooking the lonely gravel road that fed their trailhead. I sat in the dark, the engine off, the chill seeping through my coat. Through high-quality night vision binoculars, I watched her sedan arrive, the headlights cutting off. A figure emerged from the trees, Kael. They met not with a passionate embrace, but with the brisk, efficient solidarity of fellow soldiers before a mission. A quick hug, a clap on the shoulder, a shared glance at the sky. They shouldered their packs, small and lethal, and were consumed by the forest's black maw. My breath fogged in the cold air. The wait felt eternal. Then less than 40 minutes later, the peaceful darkness was shattered. Two sheriff's SUVs and a Forest Service pickup, lights flashing silently, roared down the road and skidded to a halt, blocking the entrance. Doors flew open, casting long, dramatic shadows. The beams of powerful flashlights stabbed into the trees. Moments later, the two figures re-emerged, blinking, disoriented, caught in the crosshairs of official scrutiny. I watched the pantomime unfold. The deputies stepping forward, hands resting on duty belts, the request for identification, the flashlights illuminating their confused, then defiant, then terrified faces. I saw the moment a ranger, holding one of their packs, pulled out the waterproof case and then the forged IDs. Nina's hands flew to her mouth. Kael's defiant Wilderness King posture crumpled in on itself as another ranger began reading from a tablet, likely listing the codes for illegal structures, unlawful occupation, and commercial use of protected federal land. I drove home in the deep, resonant silence that comes just before dawn. Nina was brought back the next afternoon, not by Kael, but in the back of a sheriff's cruiser, delivered to our doorstep by a stern-faced female deputy who gave me a long, knowing look. The defiant warrior was gone. What stood on my porch was a shell-shocked woman, hollowed out by public humiliation and the utter collapse of her fantasy. The wilderness guru was in custody, his kingdom revoked, facing fines that would bankrupt him, and the very real possibility of jail time. Her family knew every sordid detail. Her escape route was now a crime scene, permanently blockaded by law enforcement and the immutable barrier of her own shame. "How could you do that?" she whispered later, her voice raw, her eyes red-rimmed but dry, as if she had no tears left for this, the true disaster. "You taught me," I said, my voice empty. The anger burned away to cold ash. "You and Kael, you taught me that when you're in a hostile environment, you use every resource at your disposal. You exploit every weakness. You observe, you plan, and you execute to survive. You just never once considered that I might be capable of learning the lesson. You mistook my love for weakness, my home for a cage, and my patience for oblivion." I served her with divorce papers the following week. The court, presented with the ironclad evidence of her attempt to fraudulently transfer marital assets and vanish with a man engaged in criminal activity and manipulative coercion, was not sympathetic. She received the bare minimum settlement, which was still infinitely more than she had planned to leave me with. I keep the knife. It sits on my desk now, a paperweight for a life that once was. Sometimes, in a moment of grim reflection, I pick it up, feeling its perfect, deadly balance, testing the razor sharpness of the edge with my thumb, tracing the intertwined initials with a cold curiosity. It is a beautiful, well-made trap. The survival school taught her how to build shelters from windfall, find water in seemingly barren ground, and navigate by the distant, cold light of stars. But the most critical survival skill of all, the one Kael either failed to teach or deliberately perverted, is knowing who you can trust in the wild. It is understanding that not every offered hand means to pull you up, and not every path leading away from pain leads towards freedom. In the end, she failed that test spectacularly because she mistook her one true ally for the enemy and the most dangerous predator for her guide. I sent her to the wilderness to find her strength, and she used every ounce of it to walk away from me. Now, the only wilderness left is the vast, quiet one in my own heart, and I am learning, slowly and without a guide, to survive that.